Hey Ghost Heads, it's Adam from Channeling Spirits, and today we're going to be discussing what happened during and before the 1984 classic Ghostbusters. Let's be clear, we're not going to be talking about the extensive character histories. We're going to touch on those in later videos. Instead, we're going to be focusing on the timeline of events that occurred in Ghostbusters, as well as those that directly preceded it. We will be dealing largely with soft canon material. Now, that is material that has not been confirmed as canon, but is not directly disputed by any canon publication. And for simplicity's sake, we're going to be using the actors' actual birth dates as the character birth dates, as none have been given in any official media.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Now, before we get too far into what happened before, let's discuss when exactly Ghostbusters took place. There's a few pieces of evidence in the film that give us definitive dates, while others we can speculate with relative proximity. We definitely know that the events in the film took place in the autumn of 1984, specifically from mid-September to early November, after the successful bust of the Sedgwick Slimer.
We came, we saw, we kicked its ass!
A montage ensues, showing the boys busting around the city and their overnight success. A series of newspapers and magazines come on screen which all have various dates in October of 1984, with the earliest date being October 8th. The last article is dated October 22nd, exactly 2 weeks from the first printed story. Now, Janine also mentions to Dr. Venkman,
"All I do know is that I've been working 2 weeks without a break, and you promised me you'd hire more help."
Making it possible that Winston was hired on October 22nd after Peter and Ray returned from a job in Brooklyn or very shortly thereafter. When they meet with the mayor after the containment unit was shut off, Winston says,
Look, I've only been with the company for a couple of weeks, but I gotta tell you, these things are real.
Now couple that with the fact that Peter asked Dana out and they agree to meet on Thursday.
Well, I'll see you Thursday. I'm sorry I didn't get to meet you, sir, and I'm glad you're feeling much better.
That would make Dana's possession happening on either November 1st or November 8th. There is some debate on what Thursday this falls on. Personally, I like to think it happened on November 1st. For one, Samhain, the ancient Gaelic festival which our modern-day Halloween arose from, was celebrated from the sunset on the 31st of October to the sunset on November 1st. Samhain was seen as a time when the boundary between our world and the other world could easily be crossed, and many spirits did.
Ray, has it ever occurred to you that maybe the reason we've been so busy lately is because the dead have been rising from the grave?
The Mexican Day of the Dead, which spans 3 days, also begins on October 31st and concludes on November 2nd, the day when Gozer would have breached the veil into our world. So now that we have an idea of when those events took place, let's go back to before the Ghostbusters became a supernatural success story. It's possible that USA Today ran the piece on the Ghostbusters the morning after the Sedgwick bust, as the group was met by a large horde of eager members of the press.
No job is too big, no fee is too big.
Which would mean that the Sedgwick bust occurred on the night of Sunday, October 7th. Now, some have conjectured that, based on how the scenes are shot, the Sedgwick bust occurred the same day as Dana's interview, but we see Peter wearing 2 different outfits, and when Dana enters the firehouse, Ray is still working on the Ecto-1, which hasn't even been painted. So at least a few days have passed from the initial Spook Central investigation and the Sedgwick entrapment. We can also confirm that when Dana visited the firehouse, it had been several days since she had seen Zool in her fridge.
Left. That was 2 days ago, and I haven't been back to my apartment.
We also know the Sedgwick Slimer didn't start disturbing anyone until recently.
Yeah. But it's been quiet for years, up until 2 weeks ago. It was never ever this bad, though.
So Old Onion Head was likely making a ruckus roughly around September 23rd. During that time, the boys were laying the foundations of their business, buying the firehouse, filming their commercial, purchasing and restoring Ecto-1, and creating the first iterations of the proton packs and the ghost traps. Now, when exactly in September the boys encounter the librarian ghost is hard to say. However, the official novelization, Ghostbusters, The Supernatural Spectacular, by Richard Mueller, also corroborates the encounter took place in the fall, specifically in September. So now that we've established a little bit of a timeline, let's talk about what happened before that fateful September day. The script for Ghostbusters went through several drafts, which included scenes that were cut or modified. In the August 5th, 1983 version, Peter states that for the past year the group had investigated 72 apparitions, without success, making the librarian ghost number 73. Then, in the October 7th, 1983 script, the line was simplified to every psychic occurrence in the tri-state area for the past 2 years. However, in the final film, the only information we get is...
You guys have been running your ass off, meeting and greeting every schizo in the 5 boroughs who says he has a paranormal experience. What have you seen?
The language implies that Venkman has not been a part of most of these investigations. However, the August draft replaced Peter's negative reinforcement experiment with him meeting with the Board of Regents that would ultimately deny their grant and evict them from the college campus. Among the possible 72 investigations they encountered, Peter mentions the 1910 Shropshire demon blamed for numerous livestock mutilations in the area, a poltergeist in Vermont, mysterious rashes in northern Quebec, bent spoons, and a rockfall the week before, which they arrived to study after it had happened. At some point during this, it is also likely that Egon created the PKE meter, which he has while checking out the New York Public Library. The other technology probably could not have been created until they had enough valence readings.
According to these new readings, I think we have an excellent chance of actually catching a ghost and holding it indefinitely.
Well, this is great. If the ionization rate is constant for all ectoplasmic entities, we could really bust some heads.
The films never make mention of how the original trio meet, but other sources expand their history. In Ghostbusters, the Supernatural Spectacular, it notes Dr. Venkman introduced Drs. Spangler and Stantz to each other. This would make sense given his charismatic and at times manipulative nature. But what about poor Winston? The oft-forgotten fourth member actually had an extensive history and was introduced much earlier when other actors were being considered for the role. The demands of the story also found introducing him later helped keep the pacing going, while allowing him to be the everyman the others could explain their technobabble to. But Winston's original resume, which was still present in the October 7th, 1983 draft, mentions him having a background in electronic countermeasures, strategic air command, being a black belt in karate, as well as a small arms expert. The Supernatural Spectacular also elaborates that he had been out of the Air Force for a couple of weeks, with no luck finding a job when he saw the ad. Up until then, he had been living with his mother, Lucille. So there we have it, folks, a timeline of events that transpired during the autumn of 1984, and actions that brought the 4 founders together. If you enjoyed this video, keep checking back for more content. I'm Adam with Channeling Spirits, and thank you for watching.